You know that physical weight of having like 50 tabs open at
Oh
once?
yeah, the digital paralysis.
Exactly, yeah. Your phone is buzzing with breaking news alerts. Your inbox is just a complete disaster zone, and you just feel this crushing cognitive paralysis from way too much information.
Right.
And we tend to blame, algorithms and fiber optic cables for that. But what if I told you that exact feeling wasn't born in a Silicon Valley server farm, but in a 15th century room smelling of crushed lead and oil?
It sounds kind of crazy when you put it like that.
It really does. But today, we are tearing into a deep dive of Ronald Legarsky's History of the Internet to prove that the architecture of the web, the social dynamics, the version control, even the literal cognitive habits you use to navigate data, they were engineered like 500 years ago.
They absolutely were, yeah.
We are looking at the exact moment the human mind was permanently rewired.
It really is the ultimate historical paradigm shift, and it's just sort of hiding in plain sight. We intuitively treat the internet as this strictly modern, electronic phenomenon. But the foundation of the information age, it didn't start with silicon.
Right, it started with paper and ink.
Exactly. It started with the mechanization of text reproduction.
Mm.
When Johannes Gutenberg decoupled information from human handwriting, he didn't just invent a machine.
He didn't just make a fancy stamp.
No, I mean, he triggered a complete systems collapse of the medieval order and basically built the blueprint for global networks.
So, to really grasp the shockwave of that moment, I feel like we have to sit with the silence that came before it, right?
Definitely.
Like if we wind the clock back before 1440, what does the infrastructure of human knowledge actually look like? The term Legarsky uses is manuscript culture, which sounds really elegant, honestly.
It does sound nice, yeah.
But practically speaking, it sounds like an absolute logistical nightmare.
Oh, it's a total nightmare. I mean, imagine a world defined by absolute structural information scarcity. Before the movable type press, the reproduction of knowledge was this intensely manual, just agonizingly slow process.
Because everything is by hand.
Right. Every single ledger, every legal decree, every philosophical treatise had to be painstakingly copied by hand. We are talking about monastic scriptoriums where scribes would sit in these freezing rooms.
Literally freezing.
Using reed pens, copying text word for word, page by page. It was brutal work.
And the physical materials were just as much of a bottleneck as the labor, weren't they? Like, I read once that producing a single large Bible required the skins of hundreds of sheep just to make the vellum parchment.
Yeah, hundreds of animals for one book.
That is just insane to me. Right there, you have this massive economic barrier. If a single book requires a whole flock of livestock and months of specialized human labor, a book isn't just a container for ideas anymore,
No, it's an extreme luxury asset.
Yeah, right.
A single volume could easily be worth the equivalent of a small estate.
Wow.
Because of that exorbitant cost, books were physical manifestations of wealth and geopolitical power. They were restricted almost entirely to the high clergy, the aristocracy, and heavily fortified institutional libraries.
So a regular person is just totally shut out.
Completely.
Yeah.
A medieval peasant might go their entire life without ever seeing a written word, let alone, actually reading one.
Which naturally creates the ultimate monopoly. If information is that expensive to reproduce, the people who control the capital get to decide what reality is.
Exactly.
The church and the state basically get to be the gatekeepers of all human discourse.
The centralization of power was absolute because the centralization of data was absolute.
Mhm.
You couldn't challenge the narrative because you couldn't access the data.
Right.
But beyond the economic cost and the political control, manuscript culture harbored this fatal technical vulnerability, which was human error.
Oh, right, because humans get tired.
Exactly. When a scribe copies a 400-page manuscript by hand, transcription errors are an inescapable statistical certainty.
They're going to mess up eventually.
A monk misses a word here, skips a line there, or maybe incorrectly copies a numerical value in a margin. Over 10 generations of copies, the variance in accuracy becomes just extreme.
So if I am a scholar in, let's say, the year 1200, and I'm reading a copy of Aristotle, I have absolutely no guarantee that the words on the page are actually what Aristotle wrote.
None whatsoever.
It's basically a multi-generational game of telephone played with the foundational texts of civilization.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a lossy compression format, to use a modern networking term.
Oh, I like that.
Every time the data was copied, it degraded. It lost fidelity. And this is the fragile, localized, and highly corrupted information ecosystem that Johannes Gutenberg completely shatters around 1440.
And he does this with the movable type press.
Right. He introduces durable metal type. These are individual letters cast in an alloy that can be endlessly rearranged, and he combines that with oil-based inks in a mechanical press derived from agricultural wine presses.
And the numbers on the output are just staggering. I mean, within a 50-year period following the commercialization of his press, European printing presses produced more books than all the scribes of Europe had managed to produce in the preceding 1,000 years combined.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that scale.
Let's unpack the scale of that for a second. Going from 1,000 years of manual output to eclipsing it in 50 years. That is like going from a horse and buggy straight to a supersonic jet overnight.
It really is. It's a scale of acceleration that rewrote the laws of physics for human communication. And why this matters on a systems level is what makes it a true paradigm shift.
Okay, how so?
This was the moment information was successfully decoupled from the physical presence of a messenger or the ephemeral nature of an optical signal.
Wait, by optical signal, you mean something like a smoke signal or a flag on a hill?
Exactly those.
Right.
Before the press, to get a complex message, a person had to physically hand you a fragile, expensive parchment. If you wanted a faster message, you relied on optical networks, which vanished the microsecond you observed them. The smoke blows away, the flag comes down.
It doesn't stick around.
The printing press shifted communication from those transient signals and single-point artifacts to persistent, reproducible media. Gutenberg didn't just create a book.
He engineered the capacity to manifest 10,000 identical books on demand.
Precisely. It is the transition from absolute scarcity to industrial scalability.
Okay, but hold on. Democratization is a really strong word, and Legarsky uses it heavily here to describe this era. So let me play devil's advocate for a minute.
Sure.
Wasn't Gutenberg just inventing a faster pen for the elite? Like, the literacy rate in Europe in 1450 was, what, maybe 5%?
Roughly, yeah. Very low.
How does printing Bibles faster for rich merchants actually transfer power to a peasant? I mean, is making more books a democratic shift or just an industrial one?
That is the core tension of the era, and it's a great question. The democratization didn't happen because peasants suddenly started reading Latin theology in their spare time.
Right, because they couldn't read Latin anyway.
Exactly. It happened because of what abundance does to centralized power. When you have an explosion of volume, it fundamentally shatters the architecture of authority.
Because the authority relies on being the only one with the information.
Yes. The church and the state relied on that manuscript monopoly to control the narrative. If you wanted to understand divine law, you had to go through a priest because the church literally held the only copy of the text in your region.
Because they own the servers.
Exactly.
To use a web analogy, they were the only ISP in town. If you wanted to get online, you had to go through them.
And the printing press decentralized the narrative by flooding the zone with alternative data. Information shifted from a top-down mandate, something dictated to the masses, to a distributed commodity.
Which changes everything.
And as the technology spread, the fixed cost of printing dropped. Books became cheaper to produce, making them affordable to the emerging merchant and middle classes. You didn't have to be a bishop to own a library anymore.
And if a middle-class merchant can suddenly afford a book, they have a massive economic incentive to actually learn how to read it.
Right.
So the hardware, the affordable printed book, drives the software update in the human brain, which is literacy.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it. And that climbing literacy rate triggers this incredible socioeconomic chain reaction. We have to look at the economic incentives of the early printers here.
Okay, what were they?
A printing press is a heavy capital investment. It costs a lot of money to build and maintain. To pay off your machinery, you can't just print Latin Bibles for 100 local clerics. You need scale.
You need to sell a lot of books.
You need a much larger customer base. So to maximize their addressable market, publishers began printing in the vernacular.
The local languages.
The everyday spoken languages of the streets, like German, French, and English.
This is a fascinating mechanism because it's just capitalism, right?
Pretty much.
Simply the desire for a printer to recoup their investment and turn a profit forces the standardization of local languages. They abandon the elite language of Latin just to chase the mass market.
They absolutely do. And if you take that a step further, standardizing these vernacular languages provided the essential linguistic infrastructure for the modern nation-state.
Really? How does a book build a state?
Well, before print, what we now call France or Germany, was a patchwork of hundreds of hyperlocal dialects.
Okay.
People 100 miles apart could barely understand each other. It is nearly impossible to forge a unified national identity under those conditions.
Right. If you can't talk to each other, you aren't really a country.
Exactly. The printed word froze these fluid dialects into standardized spelling and grammar. It created a unified linguistic identity over vast geographic areas.
So the economic necessity of selling more books inadvertently draws the conceptual borders of modern Europe.
It really does.
You go from a fragmented map of local dialects to millions of people realizing, oh, wait, we all read the same German. We are part of the same entity.
It formalized the boundaries of human grouping. But the structural impact of the press didn't stop at politics and language.
Where else did it hit?
The text brings us to the realm of the sciences, which underwent a revolution entirely dependent on print. We have to look closely at the concept of version control of knowledge.
I want to dig into this because this feels like the bridge between the 15th century and modern software engineering. It's so cool.
It's very cool. Let's return to the manuscript era for a moment. Imagine you are an astronomer in Paris trying to replicate the planetary calculations of an astronomer in Venice.
Okay, I'm with you.
You request a copy of their star charts. A scribe in Venice copies the chart, but because he is tired, he transcribes a 3 as an 8 in a crucial orbital equation.
Oh, no.
He sends it to you. You base a decade of your life's work on that chart, and your resulting theories are completely useless because your baseline data was corrupted in transit.
Your entire scientific endeavor crashes because of one typo by a tired monk.
Right.
And there was no way for the Paris astronomer to verify if their copy of the data matched the original master copy.
Right, there's no backup to check against. The printing press solved that. It allowed researchers across disparate geographic locations to study the exact same text, the exact same mathematical diagrams, and replicate experiments reliably.
Because every copy is identical.
10,000 copies of a scientific treatise could be struck from a single setup of type, and every single one was identical.
You know, in software development today, we rely on systems like GitHub.
Right, version control.
Programmers worldwide can pull the exact same lines of code, spot bugs, and build on top of each other's work without worrying that the core structure has randomly degraded. Gutenberg didn't just print books. I mean, he invented the first lossless data transfer protocol.
That is the precise mechanism of the scientific revolution. The cumulative body of human understanding relies entirely on exact replication. Without the ironclad guarantee that the data you are analyzing is identical to the data your colleague across the continent is analyzing, the scientific method as a collaborative global effort is literally impossible.
You're just building on sand.
Exactly. The press synchronized human thought by providing a reliable, standardized baseline of data.
So standardized language builds the nation state. Standardized data builds the scientific method. The press is essentially terraforming the cognitive landscape of humanity.
Terraforming is a great word for it.
Which brings us to a concept in the Legarsky text that completely changed how I view social media, honestly.
The public sphere.
Yes, the birth of the public sphere.
This is crucial for understanding the psychology of modern media consumption.
Walk us through it.
Unlike point-to-point signaling, say, a courier handing a sealed letter to a king, or later, a telegraph wire sending a Morse pulse from one specific station to another, the printing press was a one-to-many broadcast medium.
Right.
A single press run of a pamphlet could reach thousands of people simultaneously.
It transitions human communication from a private conversation to a public broadcast.
This one-to-many dynamic birthed what the philosopher Jürgen Habermas identified as the bourgeois public sphere.
What does that mean, practically?
This wasn't a physical room or a town hall. It was an abstract cognitive space where private individuals could come together as a public body to engage in rational critical debate.
So people sitting in different coffee houses across London, reading the exact same essay on taxation and arguing about the exact same points with their friends.
Exactly. With the advent of the periodic press, so pamphlets, newsletters, and early newspapers, we witnessed the invention of the news cycle.
Which we are all very familiar with today.
Very familiar, maybe too familiar. But before print, news wasn't an industry, right? It was a phenomenon.
A phenomenon.
Yeah, it was rumors carried by traveling merchants or returning soldiers, arriving randomly and often month out of date. News was just a passive waiting game.
You just hope someone walked into your village who knew who the new king was.
Exactly.
But with newspapers, news becomes a scheduled, reliable event. You know the paper arrives on Tuesday morning.
News became a synchronized temporal experience. And this introduces the profound sociological impact of what Benedict Anderson called imagined communities.
Imagine communities. I love that term.
It's a powerful idea. For the very first time in human history, a citizen sitting in a tavern in London, reading a morning paper, knew with absolute certainty that tens of thousands of other people they had never met were reading that exact same information at that exact same moment.
Let's pause and really map that onto today because this is wild. When you pull out your smartphone, open an app, and scroll through a trending hashtag, you immediately feel connected to a massive global conversation.
Oh, instantly.
You feel part of a community of millions of people you will never meet in physical reality simply because you are consuming the same data at the same time. The psychological phenomenon we experience on Twitter or TikTok was actually engineered by 17th century pamphlet printers.
The underlying cognitive architecture is identical. That shared temporal awareness, the visceral knowledge that we're all focusing on this specific narrative right now, creates a powerful sense of belonging to a larger political or cultural entity.
Wow.
It allows you to conceptualize a community far larger than your immediate physical surroundings. The printing press didn't merely print ink on paper. It printed the modern social consciousness.
But as this public sphere expanded, the appetite for daily information became just insatiable. People didn't just want a philosophical pamphlet every few months. They demanded daily updates.
They wanted everything.
Right. They wanted maritime shipping schedules, political gossip, international conflict reports. And to feed that hunger, the technology had to evolve from a slow, artisanal process into a massive industrial pipeline.
And that's where we transition into the 18th and 19th centuries, where the printing press integrates with the broader industrial revolution.
Okay, so steam power.
Exactly. The old wooden, hand-cranked flatbed presses, which required immense physical labor just to produce a few hundred sheets a day, they gave way to these towering machines built of iron and steel, powered by high-pressure steam.
Like locomotives for ink.
Basically, yeah. And the breakthrough technology Legarsky highlights here is the Hoe lightning press, introduced in 1843.
The Hoe lightning press. How did the mechanics of it actually change the output?
It was a marvel of mechanical engineering that completely rethought the physics of printing. Older presses used a flat bed of type.
Okay.
The paper was pressed down onto it, lifted, the bed moved, it was re-inked, and the process repeated. It was full of wasted motion. The return stroke of the bed did no actual printing.
Right, it's just resetting the machine.
Richard Hoe solved this by taking the heavy metal type and locking it around the curve of a massive rotating cylinder.
Oh, so instead of a stop-and-start stamping motion, it becomes a continuous high-speed rolling motion.
Fed by steam power, this rotary cylinder could pull paper through at relentless speeds, printing tens of thousands of impressions per hour.
That's a massive leap.
It fundamentally shifted the entire printing industry's business model. For centuries, the focus was on producing permanent, durable books designed to last generations. The Hoe press shifted the economic focus to mass manufacturing ephemeral news.
The daily paper, designed to be consumed in the morning and used to wrap fish in the afternoon.
Exactly. The ultimate shift from permanent knowledge to disposable data.
But for this massive machine to actually work, it needed an entire logistical ecosystem around it, right? It wasn't just about printing the papers fast.
Right. What good is a fast press if you can't deliver the paper?
Right. It was about distributing heavy stacks of paper to hundreds of thousands of people before the news went stale.
The infrastructure required to support mass media became sprawling and incredibly complex. This system relied heavily on the integration of emerging logistical networks. You needed vast railroad networks to carry literal tons of printed paper across continents overnight.
Which is wild to think about.
And highly organized postal systems to deliver those papers into the hands of booming urban populations.
You know, when you describe it that way, massive centralized hubs, processing information, pushing it out through high-speed physical conduits to local endpoints, it sounds exactly like the physical backbone of the internet.
It really does.
It's like server farms, fiber optic cables, and local routers, but constructed out of steam, steel, and trains.
It was a physical, analog internet. And to understand the scale of this shift, we need to introduce the concept of bandwidth into a historical context.
Okay, let's do it.
In networking, bandwidth is the amount of data you can push through a conduit in a given time frame. Think about the cognitive bandwidth of a medieval village.
Pretty low, I'd imagine.
Very low.
Yeah.
The total amount of new information they received in an entire year might consist of a few verbal decrees from a local magistrate and some rumors from a traveling blacksmith.
A trickle of data so slow you barely notice it.
Now, compare that to a single 19th century Sunday newspaper delivered to a city dweller via the railway network.
Okay? That single physical object carried more data, tens of thousands of words, granular local and international advertisements, minute-by-minute stock market fluctuations, serialized fiction, political commentary, more data than a medieval person would have consumed in their entire life.
In one Sunday paper.
In one paper, information had officially become a high-volume, industrialized commodity.
The industrialization of data. But, whenever you industrialize something, you introduce massive new risks.
Unavoidably.
You can't just unleash a fire hose of daily, unverified information into the minds of millions without massive societal friction.
This brings us to the dark side of scale. The mass production of media introduced for the very first time on a civilization-wide level the potential for mass psychological manipulation.
Because if the infrastructure allows you to reach 100,000 people at once with a vital truth, that exact same infrastructure allows you to reach 100,000 people at once with a fabricated lie. Reaching massive populations simultaneously meant that propaganda, sensationalism, and highly sophisticated advertising could now shape collective consciousness in previously unimaginable ways.
Scary to think about.
Let's return to the optical networks we discussed earlier, the smoke signals and flags.
Yeah.
Their primary engineering struggle was distribution. It was incredibly difficult to get a signal across a long distance without it degrading.
But because it was so hard, the message was usually vital and simple, like, the enemy is coming over the hill. You aren't going to build a massive bonfire to transmit gossip.
Exactly. The infrastructure of 19th century mass media, the rotary presses, the trains, the telegraph wires feeding the newsrooms, it solved the distribution problem completely.
Right.
But in doing so, it introduced a terrifying new vulnerability, the susceptibility of the public mind to centralized, manufactured narratives.
Because now the channel is wide open.
Wide open. When a handful of powerful newspaper barons control the million-dollar printing presses and the distribution networks, they effectively control the reality of the imagined community.
They decide what everyone is talking about.
They have the power to whip up nationalist fervor for a war, utterly destroy political reputations, or sell miracle cures that are actually toxic snake oil.
So when I look at the digital landscape today, when I see highly targeted political disinformation, algorithmic rage bait designed to keep me clicking, and deepfakes, I shouldn't view these as uniquely digital problems, right?
No, that's right.
We are essentially dealing with the hyper-accelerated silicon version of a 19th century sensationalist tabloid every single time we open a social media feed.
The vulnerabilities we face online today are absolutely not native to the internet itself. They are inherent to any mass distribution network.
It's the network itself that is the risk.
The very system that democratizes information, that makes knowledge cheap and universally accessible, simultaneously builds the architecture for psychological manipulation at scale. The trade-off is fundamentally baked into the technology.
That's heavy thought.
When you engineer a system that drastically lowers the friction to publish, you invariably lower the friction to deceive.
That is deeply unsettling. We spend so much time blaming the algorithmic feed, but the true vulnerability is our own cognitive susceptibility to mass-distributed media.
Yes.
And that's a vulnerability that has been exploited since the steam press.
Absolutely.
But humanity didn't just drown in 19th century newspapers. To survive this daily avalanche of data, we had to invent new tools to navigate the noise. And this is where the Legarsky text makes a pivot that I found absolutely mind-blowing.
I know exactly what part you mean.
The tools we invented to cope with printed paper actually became the literal structural architecture of the digital web.
This is perhaps the most profound systemic insight in the entire historical analysis. The transition to mass media fundamentally altered the human brain's relationship with knowledge itself.
How so?
It forced a shift in the primary burden of human intelligence from memorization to retrieval.
I really want to break down that shift from memorization to retrieval because it represents a complete rewiring of what it means to be smart.
It really does.
Before books were ubiquitous, if you wanted to retain knowledge, you literally had to commit it to the wetware of your brain.
In an oral culture, or a manuscript culture where books are incredibly rare and fragile, a scholar's value was largely determined by their ability to memorize vast expanses of text.
Right.
The human brain was utilized as a primary storage device. But as the printing press began churning out more information in a decade than any human could possibly read in a lifetime, let alone memorize, that cognitive strategy became obsolete.
You just couldn't keep up.
The brain could no longer hold the sum of human knowledge. Therefore, the printing press necessitated the invention of structural, spatial ways of organizing external information.
We are talking about basic navigational tools that we completely take for granted as natural parts of a book today.
Things like alphabetical indexing, pagination, tables of contents, standardized chapter breaks, cross-referencing systems, footnotes.
Which didn't exist before.
These features largely did not exist in early medieval manuscripts. They were engineered technologies designed specifically to help human beings navigate vast quantities of text non-linearly.
Non-linearly, right.
You no longer had to read a 500-page encyclopedia from page 1 to page 500 just to find out a fact about bees. You look at the alphabetical index, found B, and jump directly to the data on page 42.
A table of contents or an index is essentially a primitive paper hyperlink.
Exactly.
You click it with your eyes and you execute the jump by flipping the pages with your hands.
It is the exact same functional mechanism. This is why the internet is not a clean break from the print tradition. I mean, it is the ultimate frictionless acceleration of it.
Wow.
Digital hypertext, the blue links you click on a web page that jump you to another site, is merely the refinement of the printed index and the footnote, elevated to an instantaneous global level.
It's all connected.
When pioneers like Vannevar Bush and Ted Nelson were conceptualizing hypertext and the early architecture of the World Wide Web, they were directly building upon the navigational metadata invented by Renaissance printers.
But if we went from memorizing data to simply knowing how to retrieve it, if we basically outsourced our memory to indexes and eventually to search engines, did the printing press actually change the physical operations of the human brain?
It absolutely rewired our cognitive habits. As the sheer volume of information grew exponentially, this fascinating economic inversion happened.
Okay, what was it?
The value of the individual document actually diminished. Think about the scarcity model. If there is only one book on medicine in your entire city, that physical object is priceless.
Sure.
But if there are 10 million books in your city, any single book is cheap and replaceable. What then becomes incredibly valuable?
The system that helps you find the specific book you need. The card catalog, the librarian, the index.
Exactly that. The value of systems for organizing, filtering, and authenticating information rose to supreme prominence over the raw data itself.
Because the data is everywhere.
Knowing how to find information became exponentially more important than holding the information in your head. This realization that the organizational metadata is more valuable than the raw data is the exact intellectual environment that sparked the dream of an interconnected global electronic brain.
It's just wild to think about.
The internet was conceptualized and built because we desperately needed a better, faster index for the massive, unmanageable pile of paper the printing press had created.
So we didn't just invent the internet out of thin air in a computer lab. We spent 500 years practicing on paper first.
We really did.
We learned how to link disparate ideas together with footnotes. We learned how to search massive databases using alphabetical indexes. We learned how to handle viral cultural trends with quickly printed pamphlets. And once we perfected that cognitive architecture on paper, we basically just electrified the whole system.
The analog blueprint was completely, comprehensively laid out. The cognitive leap, the idea that all human knowledge could be interlinked and navigated non-linearly, had already occurred centuries before the first computer was even built.
This entire historical reframing is incredible. To pull all these threads together for you listening, we started in the elite, highly vulnerable world of monks painstakingly copying manuscripts by hand, where a single typo could derail scientific progress for centuries.
Right.
We saw how Gutenberg's metallurgical breakthrough, his movable metal type, shattered those knowledge silos. It decentralized authority and inadvertently provided the linguistic tools to draw the borders of modern nation-states, while providing the exact version control required to birth the global scientific method.
And we traced the evolution from a static repository of wealth to a dynamic, synchronized public sphere, driven by the economic need to sell vernacular texts.
Yeah.
We watched that system accelerate via the Industrial Revolution, where steam-powered rotary presses and logistical networks like trains created a massive physical internet of daily news.
And we confronted the dark reality that this industrialization of information opened the door to mass manipulation and centralized propaganda on a scale humanity had never faced before.
Right. And finally, we uncovered how the sheer crushing volume of printed material forced humanity to invent navigational metadata. Indexes, pagination, and footnotes fundamentally shifted human intelligence from the memorization of facts to the rapid retrieval of data, laying the direct, undeniable analog blueprints for the digital hyperlinks of the World Wide Web.
It reveals this continuous, unbroken thread of human innovation. We are constantly driven by the desire to share, organize, and access information, and every new technology is really just a faster iteration of that ancient desire.
It's all the same underlying drive, just with better tools.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to mull over as you navigate your day. Legarsky's text makes a powerful systemic point. As the volume of information grows, the value of the individual document drops to near zero, while the value of the filtering and organizing systems skyrockets. That is precisely why Google is one of the most powerful entities in human history. Not because they write the content, but because they own the index that filters it.
They own the map.
Now, consider the technological threshold we are crossing right now with generative AI. Artificial intelligence is acting like a brand new, frictionless printing press, capable of creating infinite documents, infinite articles, infinite code at essentially absolute zero cost.
It's the next explosion of volume.
If the 500-year history we just explored holds true, the future of human knowledge and the immense geopolitical power and wealth that comes with it will not belong to those who create the content. The content will be infinite and therefore worthless. The future will belong exclusively to whoever builds the next great index, the next great algorithm to filter through the infinite noise.
Because when information is truly infinite, human attention becomes the only scarce resource left on the board.
So next time you have 50 tabs open and you feel that crushing cognitive weight, remember, you're just feeling the echoes of a 500-year-old machine trying to keep up. Keep questioning the systems you use every single day, and we'll be right here to help you dive deep into the next one.